The year was 2347, and humanity had spread far beyond the small blue planet where it was born. 17 star systems now held human colonies, billions of people living on worlds their ancestors could only dream about. Ships traveled between the stars like cars once traveled between cities, and humanity believed itself to be the masters of its own destiny. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of his starship, the Resolute, watching the endless darkness of space through the main view screen. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of many years in the void. His crew respected him because he was fair, and they trusted him because he had brought them home safely, more times than any of them could count. "Anything unusual today?" Daniel asked his communications officer, a young woman named Maria Santos, who had served with him for 3 years. Maria shook her head, her dark hair catching the light from her console. "Nothing but routine traffic, sir. A few cargo ships heading to the outer colonies, some mining vessels reporting their positions. Just another quiet day in the Kepler corridor." Daniel nodded and settled back into his command chair. Quiet days were good. Quiet days meant no pirates, no emergencies, no distress calls that would send them racing across the void to help someone in trouble. He was getting too old for excitement, but the universe had other plans. Maria suddenly sat up straight, her fingers moving quickly across her console. "Sir, I'm picking up something strange. There's a signal coming from deep space, but it's not using any frequency I recognize. It's not coalition, not corporate, not anything in our databases." Before Daniel could respond, the signal seemed to reach out and take control of the ship. The view screen flickered, static dancing across its surface. And then an image appeared that made every person on the bridge stop breathing. A creature stood before them, shown in perfect detail, despite the unknown distance. It was tall, perhaps 8 feet, with a body that was thin and graceful in a way that seemed wrong to human eyes. Its skin looked like polished black stone, smooth and gleaming, and its eyes burned with a deep purple light that seemed to look directly into Daniel's soul. Behind this creature, stretching into infinity, was a fleet of ships. Thousands upon thousands of vessels, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They hung in space like a wall of metal and power, blocking out the stars themselves. "I am Overseer Kethrel of the Dominion of 12 Suns," the creature said. Its voice did not come through the speakers. Instead, it seemed to appear directly in their minds, cold and vast and ancient. "We have watched your species for 300 of your years. We have seen what you are." Daniel forced himself to stand, though his legs felt weak. "I am Captain Daniel Hayes of the United Earth Coalition. We mean no harm to your people. We didn't know anyone else was out here." The creature's expression did not change. It had no readable emotions, no hint of anger or kindness or anything human. "Your intentions do not matter. What matters is what you are." "What do you do, and what do you think we are?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You spread like fire across the galaxy," Kethrel said. "You consume resources without thought for tomorrow. You wage war upon your own kind, with weapons that poison entire worlds. You destroy ecosystems that took millions of years to develop. You kill each other over lines drawn on maps, over differences in belief, over the color of your skin." Daniel wanted to argue, but he could not. Everything the creature said was true. Humanity's history was written in blood and ash. Even now, even after spreading to the stars, there were conflicts. There were wars. There were atrocities. "We are not perfect," Daniel admitted, "but we are trying to be better." "Trying is not enough," Kethrel replied. "The Dominion has existed for 12,000 years. We have encountered 417 species in that time. Many of them said the same thing you say now. They were trying. They meant well. They wanted to change. But when we looked at their actions, not their words, we saw only destruction." The creature paused, and somehow that pause felt heavier than any words. "The Dominion has decided. Humanity will be given 1 solar cycle to demonstrate that it deserves to survive. You must prove that you are capable of more than consumption and destruction. You must show us that your species can change, can grow, can become something worthy of the stars you have claimed. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. And if we fail? Kethril turned those burning violet eyes toward her. If you fail, you will be eradicated. Every colony will be destroyed. Every ship will be broken apart. Every trace of your existence will be removed from the galaxy. You will become nothing more than a cautionary tale, remembered only in our records as another species that could not transcend its own nature. The view screen flickered again, and for one moment, Daniel saw the weapons on those thousands of ships powering up. Energy coils that glowed like captured stars. Cannons that could crack planets open like eggs. Technology so far beyond humanity's understanding that fighting back would be like throwing rocks at a hurricane. One solar cycle, Kethril repeated. Use it wisely. Transmission ended. The view screen returned to showing normal space, the familiar stars, and the distant glow of the nearest colony. But nothing felt normal anymore. Nothing would ever feel normal again. Maria turned to Daniel, her face pale as paper. Sir, I ran the numbers while that thing was talking. Those ships. Our sensors counted over 40,000 before they had to stop. Each one of them is bigger than our largest battle station. Daniel did not respond immediately. He was thinking about his daughter back on Earth, about his grandchildren who had never seen the world where humanity was born. He was thinking about all the people across 17 star systems who had no idea that their entire existence now hung by a thread. Get me Earth Command, he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. Get me every government, every military, every leader we can reach. Get me everyone. The crew scrambled to obey, but Daniel remained standing, staring at the stars that suddenly seemed so much colder than before. Humanity had faced extinction many times throughout its history. Asteroids had nearly wiped them out. Plagues had killed millions. They had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons. But those threats had always come from within, or from mindless forces of nature. This was different. This was a judgment. Someone, something out there, had looked at humanity and found them wanting, and now they had to prove that they deserved to exist. Daniel did not know if that was possible. He did not know if humanity could change in time, or if change would even be enough. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had to try. For everyone who had ever lived, for everyone alive now, and for everyone who might live in the future, they had to try. The Resolute turned toward Earth. Carrying the most important message in human history, the news spread across human space like wildfire. Within hours of Captain Daniel Hayes transmitting his report, every government, every news network, and every person with access to communications knew the truth. An alien civilization had found humanity, and they were not impressed. They had given mankind 1 year to prove itself worthy of survival. President Catherine Bell sat in the emergency chamber in Geneva, surrounded by screens showing the faces of world leaders, military commanders, corporate executives, and scientists. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen humanity through 3 major crises during her time in office. But nothing had prepared her for this. We need to strike first, Admiral Victor Reyes was saying. He was a broad man with a voice like thunder, decorated with medals from a dozen conflicts. Before they can attack, we hit them with everything we have. Catch them off guard? Did you see those ships? Dr. Patricia Webb interrupted. She was the coalition's leading expert on alien life, though until today her job had been entirely theoretical. Admiral, they have 40,000 vessels, each one bigger than anything we've ever built. Our entire combined fleet might damage one of them. Maybe. So we just surrender? Victor demanded. We just accept that these creatures get to decide whether humanity lives or dies. No one is talking about surrender, Catherine said, her voice cutting through the argument. But we need to understand what we're dealing with before we decide how to respond. Dr. Webb, what do we actually know about these beings? Patricia pulled up her notes, though her hands were shaking slightly. Almost nothing, Madam President. They call themselves the Dominion of 12 Suns. They claim to have existed for 12,000 years and encountered over 400 species. Based on their technology and the size of their fleet, I believe them. This is not a young civilization. They've had time to perfect everything. And they want us to prove we deserve to survive, Catherine said slowly. What does that even mean? From the corner of the room, a quiet voice spoke up. Perhaps we should listen to what they actually said. Everyone turned to look at Professor Samuel Grant. He was an old man, well into his 80s, with a white beard and kind eyes that had spent decades studying philosophy and ethics. He had been invited as an advisor, though most of the military leaders considered him useless. The aliens spoke of specific things, Samuel continued. Consumption without thought. War against our own kind. Poison. Ing worlds. These are not abstract complaints. These are specific failures. Perhaps they want to see if we can do better. Do better. Victor laughed bitterly. In 1 year? Humanity has been fighting itself since before we learned to write. You think we can change that in 12 months? I think we have to try, Samuel replied calmly. What is the alternative? Fight and die. Run and die? At least if we try to change, we have a chance. The debate continued for hours. Some leaders wanted to build weapons, even though everyone knew those weapons would be useless. Others wanted to hide, scattering humanity across the galaxy so that no single attack could destroy them all. Still, others wanted to negotiate, to send diplomats to the alien fleet and beg for mercy. But while the powerful argued, something unexpected was happening among the ordinary people of human space. A young aide named Christopher Lane approached President Bell with a tablet computer. His face was strange, caught between fear and wonder. Madam President, you need to see this. The tablet showed news feeds from across human space. In New York City, thousands of people had gathered in Central Park, not to protest or panic, but to help each other. They were sharing food, offering shelter to the homeless, cleaning up streets that had been dirty for years. In Beijing, old political enemies were shaking hands and promising to work together. On Mars, colonists who had been fighting over water rights for decades were suddenly sharing their resources freely. What is this? Catherine whispered. It's everywhere, Christopher said. Word of the ultimatum leaked within hours. Everyone knows. And instead of falling apart, people are coming together. Catherine watched a group of teenagers in Lagos, building houses for families who had none. She saw doctors in Mumbai offering free care to anyone who needed it. She watched enemies embrace in places that had known only hatred for generations. They understand something we don't, she said softly. What do you mean? Christopher asked that Catherine looked up at the screens, showing the arguing leaders, and back at the tablet showing ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We're sitting here debating strategy and tactics, trying to figure out how to fight or flee or negotiate. But these people, they're just trying to be better. They're trying to prove that humanity is worth saving by actually being worth saving.
Oh my God.
She stood up suddenly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying over the arguments, I believe we have been asking the wrong questions. We've been asking how we can survive. Perhaps we should be asking how we can deserve to survive. Victor Reyes shook his head. With respect, Madam President, noble sentiments won't stop alien weapons. No, Catherine agreed. But perhaps they will stop the aliens from using those weapons. Dr. Webb, you said this civilization has existed for 12,000 years. They've encountered over 400 species. How many of those species still exist? Patricia blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know. They didn't say. Exactly. We're assuming this is just an execution with extra steps. But what if it's actually a test? What if some species passed and some failed? What if the outcome actually depends on what we do? The room fell silent. For the first time, a different kind of possibility hung in the air. Not the certainty of death, but the chance of survival. Slim, perhaps. Unlikely, maybe. But real. So what do we do? Someone asked. Catherine looked at the tablet one more time. At the ordinary people who had already figured out the answer on their own. We become the humanity we always claimed we could be, she said. We stop fighting each other. We stop destroying our worlds. We help those who need help. We heal what we've broken. And we hope that somewhere out there someone is watching and that what they see is enough. It was not a political strategy. It was simply a choice to try being better, even if it meant nothing in the end. But sometimes, trying is the only thing that matters. 6 months had passed since the Dominion delivered its ultimatum to humanity. 6 months of fear, of hope, of change that no one had thought possible. Across 17 star systems, billions of people were trying to prove that their species deserved to exist. On the colony world of New Horizon, 2 communities had been fighting for 30 years. The disagreement had started over farming land and water rights, but over time it had grown into something uglier. Families had been torn apart. Friends had become enemies. Violence had claimed lives on both sides. Paul Mitchell was the leader of the Eastern Settlement. He was a farmer, 60 years old, with hands rough from working the soil and a heart hardened by decades of conflict. He had lost his brother to the fighting 10 years ago, and he had sworn never to forgive the people responsible. Linda Cortez led the Western Settlement. She was an engineer who had helped build the colony's power systems, a practical woman who believed in results over emotions. She had lost her son in the same conflict that took Paul's brother. Shot dead during a raid that both sides blamed on the other, for 30 years Paul and Linda had refused to speak. For 30 years their communities had lived in hatred and fear. But now, with the shadow of extinction hanging over all of humanity, they found themselves standing face to face in the empty land between their territories. "I still think you're a stubborn fool," Paul said. His voice was rough, but there was something different in his eyes. Something tired. "And I still think you're impossible to deal with," Linda replied. But she too looked weary, as if the weight of all those years of anger had finally become too heavy to carry. They stood in silence for a long moment. Around them, the alien sky of New Horizons stretched in shades of purple and gold. In the distance, children from both settlements watched from behind fences, curious about this strange meeting between the people they had been taught to hate. "My grandson asked me something last week," Paul finally said. "He asked why we can't be friends with the people over the hill. I tried to explain about the fighting, about your people, about everything that happened. And when I was done, he just looked at me and asked why any of that mattered if we were all going to die anyway." Linda nodded slowly. "My granddaughter said something similar. She asked if the aliens would kill us separately or together. When I said I didn't know, she asked what difference it made." "Kids have a way of seeing through all our nonsense," Paul admitted. "They do." Another silence stretched between them. 30 years of hatred didn't disappear in a moment. The memories were still there, the pain still real. But something else was real too. The knowledge that none of it would matter if humanity failed the test. Paul extended his hand. It was calloused and weathered, the hand of a man who had worked hard all his life. "I can't forget what happened. I can't forgive it, not yet. But I don't want my grandchildren to die because we couldn't stop hating each other." Linda looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it. Her grip was firm and strong. "Neither do I. It was not peace, not yet. But it was a beginning. Across human space, similar scenes played out every day. Old enemies came together. Resources were shared. The wealthy opened their vaults to help the poor. The strong defended the weak. It was not perfect, and it was not complete. Some people refused to change, clinging to their hatred and fear, even in the face of extinction. But enough people tried. Enough people chose to be better. Meanwhile, Captain Daniel Hayes had been given a new mission. His ship, the Resolute, had been chosen to approach the Dominion fleet and attempt direct communication. He was to be humanity's voice, speaking to beings who had the power to end everything. Commander Grace Holloway. His first officer stood beside him as they prepared to depart. She was a tall woman with steady hands and steadier nerves, someone Daniel had trusted with his life for 15 years. "You know, this might be a one-way trip," she said, quietly. "Those ships could destroy us before we get within 1,000 kilometers." "I know," Daniel replied, "but someone has to try. And better us than some politician who will say the wrong thing and get everyone killed." Grace smiled slightly. Always the optimist, always. The crew of the Resolute had all volunteered for this mission. Every single one of them knew the risks, and every single one had chosen to come anyway. Maria Santos was at her communications station, ready to transmit whatever message might need sending. The engineering team had pushed the ship's systems to their limits. preparing for anything. As the Resolute approached the vast alien armada, Daniel felt a strange calm settle over him. Fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. But stronger than the fear was a sense of purpose. He was doing something that mattered. Whatever happened next, he was giving humanity a chance. Overseer Cathril, he broadcast into the void. I am Captain Daniel Hayes. I have been sent as a representative of humanity. We wish to speak with you. For a long moment, there was only silence. The alien ships hung motionless in space, their weapons dark but ready. Daniel could feel every heartbeat in his chest, counting down the seconds. Then the view screen flickered to life, and Cathril appeared once more. You are bold to approach us, small creature, the Overseer said. Its voice was still cold, still vast, but there was something else there too. Something that might have been curiosity. Your species has surprised us. We expected PA. Nasi, we expected war. We expected you to tear yourselves apart in your final days. Instead, we observed something different. We're trying, Daniel said. We're trying to be better, we've noticed. Conflicts ending that had lasted generations. Resources shared that had been hoarded for centuries. Enemies becoming allies. It is ... unexpected. Anil took a deep breath. We're not perfect. We've done terrible things. We've hurt each other in ways that can never be fully healed. But we're capable of more than our worst moments. We can choose to be better. We can change. Trell's burning violet eyes seemed to study him for a long moment. Words are simple. Anyone can speak of change while facing death. True change is proven over time through actions, not through promises made under threat. Then give us that time, Daniel pleaded. Watch us. Judge us by what we do, not by what we've done. Let us show you who we can become. The Overseer was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it spoke. The test continues, Captain Daniel Hayes. We will be watching. The transmission ended. The weapons remained dark. And somewhere, deep in his heart, Daniel allowed himself to feel something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The final month of humanity's test had begun. Across 17 star systems, people held their breath and waited, hoping that everything they had done would be enough. The changes had been real. Old wars had ended. Resources had been shared. Communities that had hated each other for generations were learning to work together. But no one knew if it would matter. In Geneva, President Catherine Bell had barely slept in weeks. The weight of representing humanity to beings who could destroy them all had carved deep lines into her face. She spent her days reviewing reports from across human space, reading about every act of kindness, every moment of unity, every sign that her species was capable of being better than it had been. Is it enough? She asked Christopher Lane, who had become her closest advisor during the crisis. Is any of it enough? Christopher shook his head. I don't know, ma'am. I don't think anyone knows except them. In orbit above Earth, Captain Daniel Hayes kept his ship positioned between the planet and the alien fleet. It was a meaningless gesture in military terms. The Resolute could not protect Earth from the Dominion any more than an ant could protect a house from a hurricane. But it was something. It was a statement that humanity would not simply wait for death without trying to stand against it. Any changes? He asked Commander Grace Holloway every morning. No, sir, she always replied. They're just sitting there, watching. But on the 34th day of the final month, something changed. A small ship burst out of hyperspace on the edge of the solar system, its engines failing and its hull covered in scorch marks. Emergency beacons screamed for help across every frequency. The Resolute was the closest vessel, and Daniel ordered an immediate intercept. Identify yourself, Maria Santos transmitted. This is the Coalition's Starship Resolute. State your emergency. The response came through in bursts of static, a woman's voice barely audible through the interference. This is Dr. Elizabeth Mora of the research vessel Pathfinder. We were conducting a survey in the Outer Rim when we found something. Ruins. Ancient ruins left by someone who came before. We need to speak to someone in command. What we found? It changes everything. Daniel ordered the damaged ship brought aboard. When the airlock opened, a woman stumbled out, supported by two of his crew members. She was small and thin, with wild dark hair and eyes that burned with desperate intensity. Her clothes were torn, her skin was covered in cuts and bruises, and she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Dr. Mora," Daniel said, approaching her carefully. "What did you find?" Elizabeth grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "The Dominion," she gasped. "They didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were created, built, designed by someone called the Architects. And the test isn't what we thought it was." She fumbled at her belt and produced a small device, projecting holographic images into the air. Strange symbols filled the space around them, along with images of structures unlike anything humanity had ever built. "We found their records," Elizabeth continued, speaking quickly as if afraid she wouldn't have time to finish. "The Architects existed millions of years ago. They spread across the galaxy, becoming more powerful than we can imagine. But they saw something coming, something that would threaten everything they had built. Not an enemy, a pattern. Species after species rising up, developing technology, and then destroying themselves. War, environmental collapse. The same story over and over again." Grace Holloway stepped closer, studying the holographic images. "So they built the Dominion to stop it?" "No," Elizabeth shook her head frantically. "They built the Dominion to find exceptions. To identify species that could break the pattern. The test isn't about punishment. It's about selection. They're looking for species that can choose to be different, that can overcome their own destructive nature." Daniel felt his heart pounding. And if a species passes, they join the Dominion. They become part of something larger, something protected. The Architects wanted to preserve intelligent life, not destroy it. But they knew that not every species could be saved. Some are too far gone, too committed to destruction. Those species are removed before they can spread their destruction to others. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. The Dominion wasn't an execution squad. It was a filter. A way of separating species that could become something greater from species that would only bring more pain and death to the galaxy. "We need to transmit this to Earth," he said. "Everyone needs to know." "There's more," Elizabeth said. "The records mentioned something else. In 12,000 years, no species has ever found the Architects' ruins. No one has ever discovered the truth about the test before it was revealed to them. We're the first." She paused, and despite her exhaustion, a small smile crossed her face. The Architects valued curiosity. They valued persistence. They valued the drive to understand. "Captain, we didn't just find information. We demonstrated exactly the kind of traits the Architects were hoping to find." On the Dominion flagship, Overseer Kethrel received the transmission from the Pathfinder at the same moment as everyone else. For the first time in millennia, the ancient being felt something it had almost forgotten. Surprise. Genuine, honest surprise. A human had found the truth. A small, fragile creature from a species barely old enough to reach the stars had traveled to the edges of explored space, risked everything, and uncovered secrets that had been hidden for millions of years. Kethrel opened a communication channel to the entire Dominion fleet. "All vessels, hold position. Do not engage. The test outcome requires immediate reevaluation." On Earth, the news spread within minutes. Dr. Elizabeth Mora's discovery was broadcast to every human world, every colony, every ship. The test was not just about survival. It was about becoming something worthy of survival. And one human had proven that the species had qualities worth preserving. President. Catherine Bell watched the broadcast in silence. Tears were streaming down her face, though she barely noticed them. Beside her, Christopher Lane was laughing and crying at the same time. "We might actually make it," he whispered. "We might actually survive." Catherine nodded slowly, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The test was still ongoing. The final judgment had not been given. And until it was, humanity would keep trying to prove that it deserved a place among the stars, in her small cabin on the Resolute. Elizabeth Mora finally allowed herself to collapse. She had pushed herself beyond all limits, risked her life a dozen times over, lost 3 crew members in the dangerous journey to the Outer Rim ruins. But she had found something that mattered, as sleep claimed her. She dreamed of the architects, those ancient beings who had tried so hard to save intelligent life from itself. She hoped they would be proud of what humanity was becoming. She hoped it would be enough. The final day arrived with a sunrise. That seemed brighter than any that had come before. On Earth, billions of people gathered in streets and parks and homes, watching the sky and waiting for judgment. On colony worlds across 17 star systems, the same scene repeated itself. Humanity held its breath together. The Dominion fleet had not moved since Dr. Elizabeth Mora's discovery was broadcast. 40,000 ships hung in space like silent witnesses, their weapons dark, their intentions unknown. No communication had come from Overseer Cathrell. No indication of what the aliens had decided. In Geneva, President Catherine Bell stood before the largest gathering of human leaders in history. Every government, every corporation, every organization of any importance was represented. They had come to hear whatever verdict would be delivered, and to face it together. "Whatever happens today," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, "I want all of you to know that I have never been prouder to be human. We faced the end of everything, and instead of tearing ourselves apart, we came together. We chose to be better. Maybe it won't be enough. Maybe nothing we could do would ever be enough. But we tried. We really tried." Above Earth, Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the alien armada through the view screen. His crew was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. They had done everything they could. Now there was nothing left but to wait. "Sir," Maria Santos said suddenly, her voice tight with tension, "the Dominion ships are moving." Daniel's heart stopped. On the view screen, he could see the massive vessels beginning to shift position. Their weapon systems were powering up, glowing with an energy that could shatter worlds. This was it. The moment of truth. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of forming attack patterns, the ships were spreading out. They were creating an opening, a path through their formation that led to a single point in space. And at that point, something was appearing. A structure materialized out of nothing. Built in moments by technology humanity could not begin to understand. It was beautiful and impossible, a station that seemed to sing with an inner light. Its architecture was unlike anything human, its all-flowing curves and strange angles that somehow felt welcoming rather than alien. Captain Hayes, a familiar voice, spoke through the communication system. "This is Overseer Cathrell. You and your species are invited to a gathering. Please follow the path we have opened." Grace Holloway nodded firmly. Maria Santos managed a nervous smile. They had come this far together. They would see it through to the end. The Resolute moved forward, flying through the corridor of alien ships toward the mysterious station. As they approached, other vessels appeared. Shuttles from Earth carrying President Bell and her advisors, from the colonies carrying their leaders, and from the Pathfinder carrying Dr. Elizabeth Mora herself. They gathered inside the station. Thousands of humans from every world and walk of life. Farmers and scientists, politicians and soldiers, artists and engineers, children and elders. They stood together in a vast chamber that seemed to stretch into infinity, waiting for whatever would come next. Overseer Cathrell appeared before them, its tall form somehow less intimidating than before. Behind it, other beings materialized, creatures of every shape and size imaginable. Some had wings, others had tentacles. Some looked almost human, while others were completely beyond description. Hundreds of species, all watching humanity with curious eyes. "You have passed the test," Cathrell announced. Its voice filled the chamber without any apparent source. "Not because you are perfect. Not because you have solved all your problems, but because when faced with annihilation, you chose to become better. You chose each other." A sound rose from the gathered humans. It was not quite a cheer and not quite crying. It was something in between. The release of tension that had built over an entire year of waiting and hoping and fearing. Catherine Bell stepped forward, representing all of humanity in this moment. What happens now? Now you join us, Kethrall replied. The Dominion is not an empire of conquerors. It is a community of survivors. Every species you see here once faced their own test and passed. They chose growth over destruction, cooperation over conflict, hope over despair. Together, we protect each other and the galaxy itself. Captain Daniel Hayes spoke up, unable to contain his curiosity. You said we surprised you? That we found the Architect's ruins when no other species had. What does that mean for us? Kethrall's violet eyes seemed to glow brighter. In 12,000 years, no species has ever uncovered the truth about the test on their own. Your Dr. Mora did what was thought to be impossible. She was curious enough to search, brave enough to risk everything, and clever enough to succeed. These are traits the Architects valued above all others. The Overseer gestured, and Elizabeth Mora found herself gently pushed forward by the crowd around her. She was still tired, still bearing the marks of her dangerous journey, but she stood tall before the ancient being. Your species will have much to learn, Kethrall continued. Technologies beyond your current understanding, histories that span millions of years, civilizations you cannot yet imagine. But you will also have much to teach. Teach? Elizabeth asked, surprised. What could we possibly teach beings who have existed for thousands of years? Something changed in Kethrall's expression. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it might have been a smile. You could teach us to be surprised again. You could teach us that even after all this time, there are still wonders to be discovered. Your species is young and small and fragile, but you are also curious and persistent and brave. These things have value beyond measure. The gathering continued for hours. Humans mingled with beings from worlds they had never imagined, asking questions and sharing stories. Old enemies embraced, knowing that their petty conflicts meant nothing in the face of what they had just become part of young Christopher Lane. Found himself standing next to a creature covered in iridescent feathers, with kind golden eyes that reminded him of his grandmother. Were you scared? Christopher asked. When your species took the test, the feathered being tilted its head thoughtfully. Terrified. We thought for certain we would fail. Our world had known so much war, so much destruction. But we learned something important in those final days. Fear can destroy, or fear can unite. The choice is always yours. Christopher nodded slowly. Watching Captain Hayes shake hands with Overseer Kethrall, watching President Bell embrace Dr. Mora, watching humanity take its first steps into a larger universe. What's it like? He asked, being part of the Dominion. The feathered creature made a sound that might have been laughter. It is challenging, and wonderful, and terrifying, and the greatest adventure any species can have. You will struggle, and you will fail sometimes, and you will want to give up. But you will also discover things about yourselves that you never knew. You will become more than you ever thought possible. As the gathering drew to a close, Kethrall addressed humanity one final time. The warning was given. The test was passed. You have proven that you deserve to exist. But remember this, the test never truly ends. Every day, every choice, every action is part of proving what you are. The species that forget this lesson do not last long among the stars. Daniel Hayes looked out at the assembled humans, at the alien beings who are now their allies, at the vast universe waiting to be explored. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. The warning had been given, the test had been passed, and humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning, as ships departed the station and the Dominion fleet began to disperse, taking positions throughout human space as protectors rather than executioners. A new chapter in the story of the universe began to write itself. It was a story of growth and discovery, of challenges met and wonders unveiled. It was a story of a small species from a small planet that had looked into the face of extinction and chosen to be worthy of survival. It was humanity's story, and it was only getting started.